This Bible story will cure your insecurities. I know because it cured mine, although it's something that I have to continually work on. I've struggled with different insecurities my whole life, which resulted in me not thinking I was good enough for opportunities, friendships, and relationships. If there was one thing that held me back the most in life, it was this. But what God taught me in the story of Gideon completely changed how I view myself, and I pray it does the same for you. If you have your Bible, grab it and let's get into this word. The story starts with the Israelites doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. So for 7 years, he gave them into the hands of their enemies, the Midianites. One day, an angel of the Lord sat down under a tree where Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. This may seem like an insignificant detail, but right off the bat, this scene tells us where Gideon's self-worth is. The Midianites were so oppressive that Gideon had to hide the food that he was making to feed his family just so they could survive. Imagine the shame and embarrassment Gideon must have felt to have to do that. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Notice how the moment that Gideon felt inadequate is the exact moment that an angel appeared to him and spoke highly of him. The Lord looked past his circumstance and spoke directly about who he was. This is the first lesson we learn on self-worth. God looks at our character, not our conditions. However, Gideon had such a low self-worth that he couldn't even receive the compliment from the angel. Instead, in his one reply, he makes 3 mistakes that causes a lack of self-worth. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us?" The first mistake is complaining. Gideon complains about the Midianites' oppression, essentially saying his situation wasn't what he expected. Meanwhile, God had blessed him with a family, food, health, and safety. Yet Gideon only looked at his burdens instead of his blessings that he'd been given. Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, "Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?" The second mistake is comparison. Instead of being grateful for the wonders that God had done for the Israelites in his lifetime, Gideon compared his situation to the miracle of Moses, bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, which he probably heard magical stories about when he was a kid. The issue with comparison is that you typically compare the good parts of their situation with the bad parts of yours. Gideon didn't realize that Moses and the Israelites went through a ton of struggles themselves, like wandering the desert for 40 years, for example. Comparison prevents us from recognizing the wonders that God has done in our own life. But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. The third mistake is blame. He blamed the Midianites' oppression on God, like it was his fault, not realizing that the Israelites were committing major sins and God had already given them chance after chance. In verse 10, God said, "I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." And that's why they were in the position that they were in. The Lord didn't abandon them. They abandoned the Lord. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Instead of arguing with him, the Lord disregarded Gideon's complaints and instead focused on the solution to get his people out of their mess. Gideon hadn't even considered how he could change the situation or take responsibility for it when the angel came to him. He only considered the negatives on complaining, blaming, and comparing. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." Again he compares, and again we see his low self-worth. An angel of the Lord came to him and told him that he would save his people, and he immediately disqualified himself and made an excuse. But before you call him crazy for not listening to an angel of God, to be honest, his excuse was kind of valid. Gideon's army had about 30,000 soldiers, while the Midianite army had over 100,000. Be honest, you wouldn't have wanted to fight that battle either. I guarantee you'd given a worse excuse for something smaller. But external factors like numbers, skills, money, and status doesn't determine your worth in God's eyes. The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." The angel doesn't encourage Gideon by lying to him and saying, "No, your clan is so powerful, and you're the best in your family," which is what we sometimes do to be encouraging. God knew what Gideon was saying was true, which is exactly why he chose Gideon, because God isn't asking us to do it ourselves. He's asking us to trust him. It might be true that you have no experience, that you're not skilled enough, or by the world's standards, simply not good enough. But we serve the creator of the universe. Don't you think he's capable of bringing you through any situation? But only if you have faith, and he often puts you in those exact situations so you can strengthen your faith. Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me." Despite an angel of the Lord telling him twice that he would save his people, Gideon felt so unworthy that he asked God for a sign, even though an angel was right in front of him talking to him. That's how much he couldn't fathom himself being the guy for the job. But God was gracious enough to fulfill his request and give him an undeniable sign. So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it "The Lord is Peace." While the lack of self-worth causes us to feel fear, anxiety, and inadequate, the opposite of those feelings isn't to feel cocky, arrogant, or better than. True self-worth is peace of mind that we are enough. Now all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples joined forces and crossed over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. The Midianites were coming closer, and the upcoming war was becoming a reality. So Gideon began to feel inadequate all over again. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me just make one more request." Gideon went on to ask for 2 more signs to make 1000% sure that God was calling him to do this. And twice more, God was gracious enough to fulfill those requests. Finally, Gideon decided to gather his troops and prepare for battle. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian in their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me." Imagine that. Right after Gideon finally developed the courage and the faith to carry out God's mission for him, God moved the goalpost and made Gideon's task even more impossible than it already was. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. But the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. God went on to run Gideon's army through a series of tests to lower the numbers of the army until Gideon had only 300 soldiers to fight against the Midianite army of over 100,000 soldiers. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapsed, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. In this very moment, best believe Gideon was absolutely terrified. If he was scared to fight the Midianites with 30,000, he definitely didn't think he would win with 300. I'm not gonna lie, I would have been hot. 300 is crazy. At that point, I would have just told God to give me 3. Either way, we don't have a chance. But what did Gideon do? So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300. Gideon obeyed God's orders and went forward with the 300, despite his fear, which shows that God doesn't require perfect faith, just obedient action. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, get up, go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. God knows all and knew that despite his brave obedience, Gideon was still petrified of fighting the Midianites and felt unworthy about delivering his people. So God gave him a much needed boost. Notice how God said, if you're scared, go with Purah. And then the next sentence, Gideon went with Purah. This is proof that even on the day of the battle, Gideon still had major doubts and insecurities. But that doesn't make sense. Why would God give Gideon yet another sign and include it in the story? Wouldn't that make Gideon, one of the well-known Bible heroes, look weak? Yes, that's the point. Because our weaknesses allow God to show up the strongest. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, get up, the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands. After 4 signs, while still feeling inadequate, Gideon took his army and fought the Midianites. What happened next is something Gideon never could have predicted. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. The army fled. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh were called out, and they pursued the Midianites. God gave him allies and reinforcements that he hadn't even previously considered. From the confidence boost the day of the battle, to his opponents turning on each other, to gaining allies, these are proof that God supports those who surrender. When you're in a situation that feels so insurmountable that you have no idea how you're going to get through it, if you surrender to God, he will support and lift you up when you need it most. Don't take my word for it. Think about your own life and all the situations that you didn't think you could overcome, yet here you are, still standing. Zebah and Zalmunna, the 2 kings of Midian, fled, but he pursued them and captured them, routing their entire army. Gideon went on to destroy the entire Midianite army, as God had said, and God was glorified through the process. Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace for 40 years. Now think back to the beginning, how Gideon was complaining to the angel, how he disqualified himself and gave excuses when the Lord chose him, how he asked for a sign 3 times for confirmation. Gideon wasn't the likely candidate at all to do the impossible and defeat the Midianite army. But because Gideon had just enough faith to act with obedience, thousands of people were given peace for 40 years, which shows that sometimes we are blessed to be a blessing. Allowing feelings of inadequacy to control you and prevent you from obeying God not only hinders your walk, but may prevent you from blessing countless others who you never could have imagined that you could bless. Now you know how to develop self-worth. It's up to you to apply these principles and be all that God has called you to be.